Thank you, everyone. Hello. I can see some familiar names. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you. I hope you enjoyed this session. So I'll be talking about intercultural language teaching and learning. And one of the reasons why I chose this topic, which is it's my very first presentation on this topic. So bear with me. It's because I have recently taken a module at my PhD, which was about intercultural language teaching, and I just loved it. I just loved it, and I had to, as a final assessment, we had to present a course syllabus on how we would teach. How we would approach intercultural language teaching for students, and I loved doing that assignment. So it's to come up with activities with the syllabus, and I really loved the experience, and I got a distinction for that. So and I've been more interested in applying intercultural language teaching in my own classroom as a trainer and as a teacher as well. So I really hope you enjoy it. So let's talk about the intercultural speaker. And I'm going to talk about what is interculturality in as an overview. But the intercultural speaker, in this context, we don't usually call them as learners, because the language learner has different layers, and in the intercultural language classroom, we aim to develop the speaker's intercultural competence, and I'm going to talk about that, because that learner is not only a learner, but they're also a person. They are using language as a communication tool. So this needs to be taken into consideration as well. So what do learners or the speakers, what do we try to, how do we try to develop them in this new, let's say, context? So the intercultural speaker is proficient in navigating cross-cultural conversations. So they are not required, and they are not expected to assimilate the native-like pronunciation or native-like model. So they can navigate through these different conversations, different cultures, talk to people from different backgrounds. And they can also foresee and mitigate cultural misunderstandings. So they are not, they don't shy away from controversial topics, for example, or if there is any misunderstanding, they are not shamed for that. The intercultural speaker can understand and can cross this barrier and become and really be themselves, be authentic. And this leads to the next one. So they are capable of adapting to different backgrounds using their emotional and cognitive demands in diverse situations. And I'm going to give you an example. So this talk is from theory to practice. I'm giving you a little bit of theory, and then I'll talk about how we can apply this concept in the classroom with some examples. Okay, so what is interculturality? In terms of language, there are some things to bear in mind. So how is language seen? So language usually seen as an official or a national entity, right? For example, English, Turkish, French. It's also seen as a structural system with sounds, words, phonology, the grammar. But in the intercultural classroom, language is mainly seen as social practice for meaning-making, for co-constructing identity, and to achieve their social goals. So it's not, language is not transactional. So for example, I go to the supermarket and I buy a few things and I go to the cashier. It's not just that. Language communication also encompasses the learner's self-presentation. So it's important to take that into account. Language is also, the language use varies among individuals, groups, and contexts, right? Depending on various factors, their age, their background, where they have studied, where they were born, where they have lived. And as I've mentioned before, language represents self and relationships. Okay. Encultural. So the traditional view of culture, is really, it's usually through literature, the area of study, right? But the modern view is sees culture as something more fluid, more symbolic, and created by social groups. So we are really stepping away from that stereotyped vision of culture. For example, if I ask you, what's the first thing that springs to your mind when I say British culture? Can you type on the chat box? A British person. What's the first thing? Great humor, tea. Manners, tea, punctual. Okay, tea. I was expecting that. Monarchy, politeness, fish and chips, right? Okay, and if I ask you, what's the first thing that, if I say Italian culture, what food? Pizza. I knew that, yes. I mean, I'm not discrediting you. This is also part of the culture, but you see that this is a little bit a stereotyped idea of that country, and culture is not just country, right? So we're going to look at different happy people. I use hands a lot, so am I Italian because of that? So you see, culture is really, it's something really fluid. And culture helps interpret communication and performed in context. So let's see what that happens. So why do you think I showed this picture? This is it's really, it's very unconventional if we think about an Indian person, right? But I wanted to bring something really shocking in a way, because this is also about culture. It's also about interculturality. It's a transgender woman, an Indian transgender woman. And how do we understand interculturality? Okay, so interculturality is about active engagement, not just knowledge. It's about interactions, meaning-making, reflection, and the participants, the speakers, not just learners, but the speakers also recognize their active role in this new context and how diverse it is. They also acknowledge their enculturation, and enculturation means that, for example, I'm originally Brazilian, right? So when I acknowledge my enculturation, I understand, or I take the Brazilian culture to myself, and I take it as mine. But this also brings stereotypes, biases that are related to this idea of culture. Okay, and it's important to understand, not reject this idea of stereotyped, for example, biases. We also, well, in the intercultural classroom, there's also an understanding of personal reactions and implications for future interactions. Let's see how that happens. Okay, so there's an active and these are two very important dimensions in interculturality, this active engagement and reflection. So there is a critical approach to interpret language and culture. So it's not just, oh, British people say this, so that's how you should do it, or Americans say this. No. So in the intercultural classroom, there is a reflection and there are questions, and we challenge the participants. So there is a rejection of that, as I said before, this native-like model. We embrace multiple perspectives, so there's no right or wrong answer. Things are also ambivalent. So reflection plays a central role in the intercultural classroom. Okay, so the actions, responses, and meanings are extremely important in the classroom, and it helps understand consequences and new discoveries of what participants do in the classroom. All right, so what are the core aspects of intercultural teaching? So I'm just highlighting two here. So it focuses on the variety of human experiences across different languages and cultures. And there's an incorporation of language and culture in the classroom communication activities. Okay. So what happens in the classroom? Ideally, we should develop in the participants and the speakers to develop their assumptions about language, culture, learning, and also their own language. So in the intercultural classroom, language classroom, there is not a rejection of the speaker's first language. And it's quite the opposite. This is very, it's very beneficial to the speaker, to the participant, because once they understand the meaning making, they can interpret what happens within their own language, in their own culture, they can understand others. So yeah, I'm going to give you an example of that. So we recognize culture as something participative, not fixed, not static. There are variations of different of expressions, for example. We embrace language as a social practice, not just learning vocabulary or grammar or learning how to use the present perfect or past perfect, but or how to pronounce such and such words, but it goes beyond that. Okay, language is seen as a social practice, and in every classroom there is an opportunity for creating and learning about cultures, and this learning is important. So the intercultural speaker has or should have an open mind and should really be open and be sensitive to other people's culture. Okay, what are the challenges? What are the roles and the challenges of the language learner in the classroom? So the first role, yes, let's say, or challenge is that the language learner is central in intercultural capabilities development. So it's very important to be active and to be responsive to other participants. They also share personal experiences, and these experiences influence engagement with others. So it's very important to really encourage learners, speakers, to share their opinions, to share their views, to share their ideas on different concepts. What are the challenges? There are many, many challenges. First thing is that they are not expected to be authentic, right? How many times have we asked our students to, for example, when doing a role play, how many times have we asked them to, okay, you are going to be John and you're going to be Ellen and you're going to do this role play. So they are pretending to be other people, not really themselves. So how about shifting this and really asking them to be themselves and to see their reactions to different experiences that we bring to the classroom? So it is a challenge, right? It is a challenge because they're encountering a new language, new culture. They are being asked to be themselves and not to be the characters of the book. So this can be a challenge for learners, especially if they are not exposed to that, or sometimes depending on the country, they are more used to, I don't know, being depending on also the approach that the teacher, the school uses in the classroom. So this could be a huge challenge for students. And another challenge is the need to analyze experiences to foster understanding. So reflection is vital in the intercultural classroom. And by analyzing other people's reactions, responses, opinions, they foster their understanding and how to reflect on their own participation as well. I'm going to give you an example of all that, okay? I promise. Just checking here yeah, okay, so I'm just looking at the comments. Right, and what are the roles of the learner? Yeah, the learner is an individual, but they play different roles, and they are seeing, yeah, they play different roles. So the first one is the learner as an individual. So they are identified by abilities and progress towards a native speaker goal, which is something we don't want in the intercultural language classroom. So it's quite problematic to have this native speaker goal, pronunciation, or yeah, you should say this, okay? And I'm going to give you an example. The language learner is also a language user, and the second and the third ones are, we're going to place more focus on the two roles, language user and as a person, a human being, okay? So the language user uses language repertoire for communication, what they know, what they have learned from their previous experiences, and they use that, okay? They have rights to self-expression. I know it might sound a bit obvious, but it isn't. Not sometimes in the classroom, they are quite restricted and limited to those situations that sometimes we teachers present to them. And here we want them to really be able to express themselves. Oops, sorry, how did I do that? Okay, oh, sorry. So the learner, the language user interacts culturally, sorry, not as a native speaker. So they are always themselves. We really avoid asking them to, for example, in in tasks, activities, we avoid asking them to pretend to be other people. And they are seen as a person with their unique personalities, their identities, their positive experiences, the negative experiences that they bring, relationships with languages and cultures, especially, but not exclusively, but especially if they are adults. Okay, so these are two processes that happen. One of the three with the reflection that happened in the intercultural language classroom. So we talked about meaning making. Okay, so the meaning is co-constructed among those participants in the classroom or in this context. So the meaning is understood. So people understand how language and culture shape it. Communication is negotiation of meaning, so there's nothing fixed. There's it's not one size fits all. It's really depends on the participants and their relationship with the language, their the level of proficiency that they have in the language, and the use of resources from language and culture for creating meaning. So the use of resources, and resources, I mean, their own experiences as well. So they bring their experiences to this co-construction of meaning. So this is one step. The other step is the interpretation. Okay, so what is it? It's the process of understanding others' different thoughts, ideas, and not just understanding, but also respecting and being sensitive to the different, to something that is different from you, from your ideas. So it's the interpretation is based on 4 understanding from previous experiences. The 4 understandings is exactly that. Does your learner, or do your learners bring, what do they bring in the language classroom from previous experiences? And they also create shared understanding. This is very important. Shared understanding from individual starting points. So let's talk about the language experience, their interaction with others. So the participants use language as experience for their interaction. So that influences self-presentation, perception, and their own ideas. And the focus here is on meaning making and interpretation. It's not about being right or being wrong, being accurate or being, we don't like these words, to be honest, accurate or right or wrong. Rather, we tend to use appropriate. Is it appropriate for that context, for that situation? So this is the key word. Is it appropriate? Is it inappropriate? And who considers appropriate or inappropriate? So some of the features of language learning experiences. So we have the personal dimension of the learners. They should be reflective and interactive. So the objective is to form coherent understanding and to avoid, in a way, misunderstandings among the participants. And how can we help them develop experiences and use of collections? Collections would be set of experiences that learners have in the classroom. So it's important to develop those interactions, and a few things to consider are the purpose. What's the purpose of that task or that activity? The context, the process in which learners will develop their understanding, will construct meaning, the product, and reflection. And what can we, I'm just looking at the time, okay. And what kind of materials, resources can we use? Anything really, or sometimes even nothing, no material. It can be no prep. But if you want, you can use text, videos, music, just an image. We can do so much with an image. And it doesn't have to be from the internet. It could be a photo that your students bring, or a photo of yourself, or it can be a personal image, a personal photo, and they add to language experiences. So let me give you an example. Right, okay. How should we select what's good, what's recommended? Not how should we, what's recommended in terms of selection and adaptation of resources? I'm just checking here. Okay, I'm going to read that later, okay? So how should we, what's recommended in terms of selection? Authentic instances with target cultural framing. What do I mean by that? Ideally, we want to use authentic materials, authentic texts that have not been adapted or have not been modified. So it could be a text from the newspaper. It could be a recording that your learner has with their family, for example. So, for example, the use of WhatsApp, those recordings could be used as well. It could be songs or video clips of different films, ads, whatever. But it's important to it's important that these materials are more authentic, or authentic-like, let's say, within the target cultural framing. So and what should we bear in mind in terms of the material? So recency, so how timely is the material? How recent was it published? Because that also affects the understanding of the material. For example, I'm a little bit old, and my students are like young adults. Most of my students, 18, 19. Sometimes I bring references of TV shows, for example, Friends. Most of them don't know, they have no idea what Friends is. And it's funny in a way, because I need to explain and show some clips, but for them it might not be so relevant. They might not really resonate with that. So this creates a kind of barrier for their understanding. So consider that. Relevance, accessibility, and diversity. So we try to avoid bringing those stereotyped images or texts or concepts that just perpetuate something that we don't want our students to encounter. And if you cannot really find, or if you are bound to use course books, for example, think about how these materials can be adapted to your learners, because they can be adapted, or you can offer language support. For example, can you use do you speak, and can you use your students L1, and in which moments do you think this could be beneficial to students? And what kind of scaffolding techniques can you provide to your students so they can access the materials and they can learn? And how can we evaluate the resources and use them critically? So consider when you're selecting your resources, your materials, consider possibilities for interactions. Okay, interaction. So how are your students going to interact with that material? And are they going to interact as themselves? Are you going to ask them to give a presentation, or do they have to come up with a dialogue? So think about different possibilities for interaction, or just make comments or discussions within their group. How can they reflect on that material? There should be an awareness of the values and theories in resources, and avoid, as I've mentioned before, avoid cultural reductionism and relativism in language learning materials. So avoid bringing stereotyped images that don't really reflect on the culture that you're using. And I don't, just checking the time here. What time do we stop, Luke? past.
It's past, yeah. So 5 minutes left.
Yeah, oops, okay. So let me show you some examples, sorry. I want to show this example here of an image that you can bring, okay? So the walking appointment. So, you know, there's always a unit in the book that is places in town, right? Places in town, hairdresser, or types of hair, or whatever. But how about bringing this walking appointment and really use the image to encourage students comments. What is that? Have you ever been to a place like that? And you can ask some questions. So for example, in terms of the walk-in appointment, you can discuss different hairdressing practices across cultures, because this is, for example, this is in the UK. You can ask if there are these types of walking appointments to go to a hairdresser in their countries, right? This is a cultural practice. In terms of language and communication, hairdresser scenarios can be used for language learning skills with specific vocabulary and pragmatics of conversation. So you can come up, or you can ask students to come up with dialogues in this walk-in hairdresser. And you can also teach social norms and behaviors. Hairdressers are usually seen as social hubs, right? And intercultural classroom can explore roles and expectations within that context in different cultures. And how can students reflect on that learning? So for instance, they can compare hairdressing practices across cultures, reflecting on similarities, differences, and how their experiences and backgrounds influence their opinions. Okay. And I just want to show you another another task. For instance, this is a typical task that can be easily done in the classroom without any material. Just need a bit of creativity. So it's called pragmatic judgment task. You come up with a scenario, and you can ask your students in pairs or in groups to choose what they would respond to that. For example, you are at a park and see a friend with a new dog. What do you say? Give some options. And not only do they have to choose their option, they can come up with a different option, but ask them to explain to each other why they chose that. So by doing that, they will be their authentic selves. They are going to show their opinions, their ideas. So this is a great activity. So they are judging and explain why they answer, for example, A and not C. Is it polite? Is it considered polite? Is it not polite? So this can be done in various contexts. Another typical activity is discourse completion task. And again, you don't need anything really. So you come up with a scenario with a speaker, and then the student has to respond to that. For instance, you promised to help your sister move flats, but you forgot and didn't show up. So that's the scenario. So they have to do this in pairs, for example. Your sister says, I can't believe you didn't come up to help me move. I had to do everything myself. Ask them how they would react, how they would respond to that. And again, it's not only responding, but also explaining why they would say that, what's the rationale behind that. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I'm sorry I had to skip a few slides, but these are the references if you want to learn more. And these are my socials. Thank you. And I can answer some questions if you have.